Hello, my name is Mary Ellen Carter, and I'm 58 years old. I'm going to tell you the story of how I discovered at 14 years old that my entire childhood in the mountains of West Virginia wasn't normal, it was poverty disguised as love. Before I begin, if this story touches your heart, please leave a like on this video. It helps me share these memories with more people who might need to hear them. It was 1981. I was 7 years old, and I genuinely believed that everyone ate biscuit sandwiches for dinner. I thought every family collected rainwater in barrels. I assumed all fathers wore the same pair of work boots for 10 years straight, patching the soles with duct tape and cardboard. I didn't know I was poor, I just thought I was Appalachian. We lived in a hollow about 15 miles outside of Beckley, down a gravel road that turned to red mud when it rained. Our house was a white clapboard structure that Daddy said his grandfather built with his own hands back in 1923. The porch sagged on the left side, creating a slope we used to roll marbles down on Sunday afternoons. Inside, the wallpaper pale yellow with tiny roses was peeling in the corners, and you could see the newsprint underneath. Mama said it was from 1952, and sometimes, when I couldn't sleep, I'd try to read the headlines by candlelight. The house always smelled like wood smoke and whatever Mama was cooking, usually beans. Not fancy beans, just pintos, slow-cooked in the cast-iron pot that lived permanently on our coal stove. That stove was the heart of our home. In winter, we'd gather around it, so close our cheeks would turn red. Mama would drape wet clothes over the backs of our chairs to dry, and the whole house would fill with that damp, warm smell of steaming fabric. My daddy, James Earl Carter, worked at the mine. He'd leave before sunrise, when the sky was still that deep purple black that made the stars look like ice chips. I'd wake up to the sound of his work boots on the wooden floor, heavy, deliberate steps that made the house creak. He always kissed Mama goodbye in the kitchen. I could hear their whispers but never made out the words. Mama, whose name was Donna Jean but everyone called her DJ, didn't have what you'd call a job. She kept house, which I later understood meant she performed miracles with almost nothing. She could make a chicken last a week. Monday was roasted chicken. Tuesday was chicken and dumplings. Wednesday was chicken soup. Thursday was chicken and rice. By Friday, she'd pick the bones so clean they looked like they'd been sandblasted, and she'd make broth for Saturday's beans. I had two younger brothers, Tommy, who was 5, and little James Jr., we called him JJ, who was 3. We shared one bedroom, the three of us, 2 twin beds pushed against opposite walls, and JJ slept with me because he was still small. The room had one window that looked out over the mountain, and on clear nights you could see more stars than you could count in a lifetime. I used to think we were rich because we had our own personal planetarium. Back then, I thought our life was perfectly normal. When Mama darned our socks for the 4th or 5th time, creating these thick patches on the heels and toes, I assumed that that's just what socks looked like after a while. When Daddy came home with his hands so black from coal dust that the lines in his palms looked like rivers on a map, I thought all men's hands looked like that. When we had pancake night for dinner, just flour, water, and a tiny bit of sugar fried in lard, I thought it was a treat, not a necessity. I remember thinking we were lucky because we had a TV. It was black and white, and you had to hit it on the left side to get the picture to stop rolling. But we had one. On Saturday nights, we'd watch the Lawrence Welk show. All 5 of us crowded on the couch that Mama had covered with a blanket to hide the springs poking through. Daddy would fall asleep halfway through, still in his work clothes because he was too tired to change. His snoring would compete with the accordion music. Sundays were for church. We'd walk the 1.5 miles to Hilltop Baptist, even in winter. Mama would put cardboard in our shoes if the soles had worn through, and she'd make us wear our church clothes, outfits that we'd wear every single Sunday without fail. Mine was a blue dress with white flowers that had belonged to my cousin Sarah first, then my cousin Beth, and then somehow made its way to me. It was too big, so Mama took it in with her sewing machine, an old Singer that she pedaled with her foot because it didn't have a motor. The hum of that machine was the soundtrack of my childhood. I loved that dress. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever owned. After church, we'd have what Mama called our Sunday dinner, the only meal of the week where we ate meat that wasn't stretched to its absolute limit, usually fried chicken or pork chops. Mama would make biscuits and gravy, green beans she'd canned from our garden, and sometimes, if we were really blessed, a pie made from apples we'd picked from the abandoned orchard up the mountain. Those Sundays felt like heaven. If you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to my channel. I share these memories to honor where I came from and the people who sacrificed everything to raise us. I remember one particular evening in the summer of 1982. I was 8 years old. We were sitting on the porch after dinner, which had been biscuits and gravy again, though nobody complained. The lightning bugs were just starting to come out, tiny floating lanterns in the dusk. Tommy and JJ were catching them in a mason jar, punching holes in the lid with a nail so the bugs could breathe. Daddy was smoking his pipe, a habit he'd picked up from his father. The tobacco smelled sweet and woody, mixing with the scent of honeysuckle that grew wild along our fence line. Mama was shelling peas, her hands moving in that automatic rhythm that came from thousands of repetitions. The peas hitting the bowl made a satisfying tick-tick-tick sound. "Daddy," I asked, "how come we don't have a car like the Hendersons?" The Hendersons lived about 3 miles up the road. They had a car that was only about 5 years old, shiny and blue. Ours was a 1967 Ford pickup that Daddy had painted himself with rust-preventive paint, giving it this mottled camouflage appearance. It broke down about once a month. Daddy took the pipe out of his mouth and looked at me with those gray eyes that always seemed tired. "Well, baby girl, the Hendersons' car might be prettier, but our truck has character. Plus, I know every bolt and wire in that engine. Can't say that about a newer vehicle." "But it's always broken," I pointed out, with the blunt honesty only children possess. Mama's hands paused for just a second in her shelling. "Daddy, soiti." "Mary Ellen," he said, and when he used my full name, I knew to pay attention. That truck gets me to work every single day that it needs to, and when it doesn't, I fix it. That's what men do. We make do with what we have, and we're grateful for it. I nodded, satisfied with that answer. It made sense to my 80-year-old brain. What I didn't understand then was that the truck broke down so often because Daddy couldn't afford regular maintenance, that he learned to fix it himself because we couldn't pay a mechanic. That making do was code for, we have no other choice. School started in September, and that's when I first began to notice differences. Small things that didn't quite add up. We rode the bus number 7, driven by Mr. Paulson, who had a white beard and always wore a John Deere cap. The ride took 45 minutes because the bus had to wind through every hollow in the county, picking up kids from houses hidden so deep in the woods you could barely see them from the road. I was in 3rd grade. My teacher was Mrs. Reynolds, a kind woman with red hair and freckles who always smelled like vanilla. On the first day, she had us all introduce ourselves and share something we did over the summer. When it was my turn, I stood up, nervous, and said, "I helped my mama can 200 jars of green beans from our garden." I was proud of this. It had taken us 3 weeks. My hands had been stained green for days. Mrs. Reynolds smiled. "That's wonderful. Mary Ellen, your family must have a big garden." "Yes, ma'am. We grow almost everything we eat." I didn't notice the way her smile changed slightly, softened into something that looked a lot like sadness. I didn't understand why. A girl named Jennifer, who sat 2 rows over, raised her hand. "Mrs. Reynolds, what's canning?" The teacher explained it, and I watched Jennifer's face wrinkle in confusion. "But why?" she asked. "Can't you just buy green beans at the store?" "Well, yes," Mrs. Reynolds said carefully, "but some families enjoy growing and preserving their own food. It's a wonderful skill." Jennifer shrugged and went back to coloring. I didn't think much about it then, but it was the first crack in my understanding of the world. Lunchtime was when the differences became more apparent, though I still didn't have the framework to understand what I was seeing. We had a cafeteria, and the lunch ladies Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Yates served hot food every day. Sloppy joes, chicken nuggets, pizza on Fridays. It smelled like grease and possibility. Most kids went through the lunch line with their trays. I didn't. I brought my lunch from home. Every morning, Mama would pack my lunch in a brown paper bag that we reused until it fell apart. Inside was always the same thing: a biscuit with butter, an apple from our tree, and if we were lucky, a piece of cornbread wrapped in waxed paper. Sometimes there'd be a slice of the previous night's meatloaf, if we'd had meatloaf. I'd sit with my friend Rachel, who also brought her lunch most days. We'd eat our biscuits and trade apple slices and talk about whatever. 8-year-old girls talk about probably horses and puppies, and whether we liked any boys. We didn't. Boys had cooties. But I started noticing the other lunches. Sarah Beth Morrison had Lunchables, these neat little compartments with crackers and cheese and meat, and a Capri Sun to drink. Michael Henderson had a thermos that kept his soup hot, and his sandwiches were on store-bought white bread, cut into perfect triangles. My biscuit, wrapped in wax paper, suddenly seemed plain. "Why don't you buy lunch?" Sarah Beth asked me one day, her mouth full of crackers. "I like what my mama packs," I said, which was true. "But don't you want pizza? Today's pizza day." I did want pizza. The cafeteria pizza, with its greasy pepperoni and stringy cheese, smelled like heaven. "Mama's biscuits are better," I said loyally. Sarah Beth shrugged and went back to her lunch. That night at dinner, beans and cornbread, with a little bit of fatback for flavoring. I asked Mama why I couldn't buy lunch at school. She was at the sink, washing our 3 plates, 3 forks, and 3 cups. We only had 1 set of dishes per person, so we had to wash them after every meal before we could use them again. "Do you not like what I pack for you?" she asked, her voice careful. "No, I like it. I just wondered." Daddy cleared his throat. He was at the table, reading the newspaper by the light of the kerosene lamp. "We had electricity, but Daddy said we needed to conserve when we could, so we used the lamps at night." "Baby girl," he said, "your mama packs your lunch with love." "Store-bought lunch doesn't have that." "But it has pizza," I pointed out. Mama's shoulders tensed slightly. Daddy saw it. "Mary Ellen, we've talked about being grateful for what we have." "I am grateful," I said quickly, sensing I'd upset them somehow. "I'm sorry." "No need to be sorry," Mama said, turning around and wiping her hands on her apron. "How about this Saturday? I'll make us our own pizza. We've got flour and tomatoes I canned. We can use some of that cheese Mrs. Hendricks gave us." My face lit up. Really? Really? I didn't know then that cafeteria lunch cost money, not much, maybe $1 or $2, but money we didn't have. I didn't know that the cheese Mrs. Hendricks gave us wasn't a gift but charity, that Mama accepted because her pride was less important than our nutrition. I didn't know that Mama's hands were shaking slightly as she dried them, or that Daddy's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. I just knew I was going to have pizza on Saturday, and I was happy. If this story resonates with you, please leave a comment below about your own childhood memories. I love reading them and connecting with people who understand. 4th grade brought more awareness, though still filtered through a child's incomplete understanding. We had a field trip to the state capitol in Charleston. The permission slip cost $5 to cover the bus and admission. Mama looked at that slip for a long time when I brought it home. "When's the trip?" she asked. 3 weeks from Friday." She nodded and tucked the slip into her apron pocket. "I'll talk to your daddy." I found out years later that she and Daddy had an argument that night. Not a screaming match, they never screamed, but a tense, whispered conversation in their bedroom that I could hear through the thin walls but couldn't make out the words. The next morning, Mama handed me the permission slip with a $5 bill tucked inside. "You have a wonderful time," she said, kissing my forehead. "Thank you, Mama." I was so excited I didn't notice that dinner that week was even simpler than usual. Biscuits and gravy for nights in a row. Cornmeal mush for breakfast instead of oatmeal. I didn't notice Mama's lunch pail sitting on the counter, still full, when she came to pick me up from school one day. The field trip was magical. I'd never been to Charleston, never seen buildings that tall or streets that wide. The Capitol building was enormous, with a gold dome that caught the sunlight and made my eyes water. We toured the chambers, saw where the governor worked, ate our packed lunches on the lawn. Jennifer Morrison bought a snow globe in the gift shop with the Capitol building inside, floating in glittery water. It cost $8. She shook it and watched the glitter swirl while her mother, who'd come along as a chaperone, watched indulgently. I wanted that snow globe more than I'd ever wanted anything in my entire life. But I didn't have $8. I didn't even have $1. The $5 for the trip had been it. I stood there, watching Jennifer shake that snow globe, and felt something I didn't have a name for yet. It sat in my chest like a stone, heavy and uncomfortable. "Mary Ellen," Mrs. Reynolds said gently, "we need to get back on the bus." I nodded and followed her, leaving the gift shop and its treasures behind. On the bus ride home, I pressed my face against the window and watched the landscape change from city to town to country to hollow. The houses got smaller. The roads got narrower. The cars got older. When we pulled up to my stop, Mama was waiting, wearing her feed sack dress, the one she'd made from cloth sacks that animal feed came in. She'd bleached them and dyed them blue, and sewed them into a dress with her foot pedal singer. I used to think it was pretty. Standing there at the end of our gravel driveway, with the rusted mailbox and the overgrown yard behind her, I saw my mother clearly for the first time. And I felt embarrassed. I hate that I felt that. Even now, 44 years later, the shame of that embarrassment burns in my throat. I got off the bus quickly, hoping none of the other kids were looking, hoping they didn't see our sagging porch or Daddy's truck with the mismatched hood. "How was it?" Mama asked, her face bright with excitement for me. "It was good," I said shortly, walking past her toward the house. I saw her face fall in my peripheral vision, saw the light dim in her eyes. "Mary Ellen, baby, what's wrong?" "Nothing. I'm tired." I went straight to my room and lay on my bed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a horse if you tilted your head right. Why didn't we have what other people had? Why was everything we owned old or broken or homemade? Why couldn't Mama buy fabric from a store instead of making dresses out of feed sacks? The answer was right there, had been right there my whole life, but I still couldn't see it. Not yet. That winter was harsh. The temperature dropped below zero for 2 weeks straight, and our house, with its gaps in the walls and single-pane windows, couldn't keep the heat in no matter how much coal we fed the stove. We wore our coats inside. Mama hung blankets over the doorways to keep the heat in the rooms we used. At night, she'd heat up bricks on the stove, wrap them in towels, and put them in our beds to warm our feet. I woke up one morning to find frost on the inside of my window, delicate ferns of ice growing across the glass. "Mama," I called. "There's ice inside." She came in, wrapped in a robe and 2 sweaters. "Well, would you look at that? Isn't it pretty? But why is it inside?" "House is just cold, baby. We'll warm it up. You get dressed quick now, and come get some oatmeal. I put extra brown sugar in yours." The extra brown sugar was maybe half a teaspoon more than usual, but she said it like she was giving me a feast. School was closed that week because the buses couldn't safely run in the ice. We stayed home. The 5 of us huddled around the coal stove. Mama read to us from the one book we owned, a Bible with torn pages and a cracked spine that had belonged to her grandmother. Daddy didn't go to work because the mine shut down when it got that cold something about the equipment freezing, which meant no paycheck for that week. I remember him sitting in his chair, staring at nothing, his jaw working back and forth like he was chewing on something bitter. "We'll be fine, James," Mama said softly, her hand on his shoulder. He didn't answer. Looking back now, I understand that he was doing math in his head, calculating what we had versus what we needed, figuring out what could be stretched and what had to be sacrificed. But I was 9 years old. I didn't understand anything except that Daddy seemed sad and the house was cold. When school started again, Mrs. Reynolds announced that we'd be doing a project about what we wanted to be when we grew up. We had to draw a picture and write a paragraph. I drew myself as a teacher, just like Mrs. Reynolds, standing in front of a chalkboard. I wrote that I wanted to be a teacher because teachers were smart and kind and they helped children learn. When I presented my project, Mrs. Reynolds smiled so wide I could see the gold filling in her back molar. "That's a wonderful goal, Mary Ellen. You'd make an excellent teacher." Jennifer Morrison presented hers next. She wanted to be a veterinarian. Her picture showed her in a white coat, holding a puppy, standing in a clinic with expensive-looking equipment in the background. "My daddy says I can go to Virginia Tech," she announced proudly. "That's where the best veterinary program is. It costs a lot of money, but he's saving for it already." "That's wonderful, Jennifer," Mrs. Reynolds said. After school, I asked Mama what college cost. She was snapping green beans, her fingers moving automatically, splitting them into precise pieces. "Well, honey, it depends on the college. Thousands of dollars, usually. How many thousands? A lot. Are you saving for me to go? Her hands stopped, just for a second, then started again. We'll figure that out when the time comes, baby. You're only 9. We've got plenty of time. But there was something in her voice, a tightness, that made my stomach hurt. Mama, will we have enough money? Mary Ellen, she said firmly, looking up at me with those blue eyes that were the color of the sky right before a storm. You don't worry about money. That's grown-up business. You just focus on learning and being a good girl. The rest will work itself out. I nodded, but the seed of doubt had been planted. That night, I lay in bed next to JJ, who was snoring softly, and I thought about money for the first time in my life. Really thought about it. We didn't have a lot of it. I knew that now. I didn't know why or how much we did or didn't have, but I knew it was less than other people. And for the first time, I wondered if that made us less than other people too. Please like this video if you're still with me. This story gets harder before it gets better. 5th grade, age 10, the year everything started to make terrible sense. It started with a dentist visit. The school had a program where a dentist came once a year to check everyone's teeth. I'd never been to a dentist before. We didn't go to doctors unless something was seriously wrong. And even then Mama preferred home remedies. The dentist, Dr. Morris and Jennifer's uncle, as it turned out, looked in my mouth and his face got very serious. Mary Ellen, when's the last time you saw a dentist? Never. No, sir. He exchanged a look with the school nurse, Mrs. Patterson. Okay, honey. Well, you've got several cavities that need to be filled. I'm going to send a note home to your parents. Cavities sounded bad. Will it hurt? The filling won't hurt. We'll use numbing medicine. But if we don't fix them, yes, they'll start to hurt quite a bit. He gave me a sealed envelope to take home. I handed it to Mama that afternoon. She read it standing at the kitchen counter, her face getting paler and paler. What's it say, Mama? You need some dental work. Is that bad? No, baby. We'll take care of it. But we didn't. Weeks passed, then months. My teeth started to hurt, especially the back one on the right side. I told Mama. Rinsed with warm salt water, she said, and chew on the other side. Shouldn't I go to the dentist? Her face did something complicated. We're working on it, baby. More weeks passed. The pain got worse. I started to have trouble sleeping. Finally, Daddy took me to the free clinic in town, the one that operated out of the Baptist church on the first Saturday of every month. We sat in a waiting room full of people who all had that same worn-down look, clean but tired, trying but struggling. A dentist who volunteered his time pulled my tooth. No filling, just pulled it. It was cheaper that way. Free, actually. This back here, he said to Daddy, not to me. She's going to need braces in a few years. Her bite is off, and it's going to cause problems. Daddy just nodded. On the drive home in the sputtering truck, I touched my tongue to the gap where my tooth had been. Daddy, will I get braces? He stared straight ahead at the road. The muscle in his jaw jumped. We'll see, baby girl. We both knew what we'll see meant. That spring, Mama started working. She'd gotten a job at the Piggly Wiggly in town, working the register 3 days a week. It meant we had a little more money, but it also meant Mama wasn't home when we got back from school. Instead, Aunt Caroline, Mama's sister who lived to Hollers over, would watch us until Mama or Daddy got home. Aunt Caroline had 6 kids of her own, all under 12, and her house was chaos. But she had a TV that got cable, and she'd let us watch cartoons while she cooked dinner for her army of children. I remember one afternoon, sitting on Aunt Caroline's worn-out couch, watching her daughter, my cousin Beth, came and sat next to me. She was 11, a year older than me, and she always seemed to know things before everyone else. Your Mama started working? Ha! She said. Yeah, mine too. She cleans houses for people in Beckley. Why? Beth gave me a look like I was being deliberately stupid. For money, dummy. Why else? But why do they need more money? Mary Ellen, are you serious? I looked at her, confused. She lowered her voice, even though no one was paying attention to us. Because we're poor. Don't you know that? The word hit me like cold water. Poor. We're not poor, I said automatically. Yes, we are. All of us. That's why we all live up here in the hollers. That's why none of our dads can afford to fix their trucks. That's why your mama makes your clothes, and mine does too. We're poor, Mary Ellen. I felt my face get hot. You don't know what you're talking about. Fine, don't believe me, but it's true. She got up and walked away, leaving me on the couch with my heart pounding and my thoughts racing. Poor? Were we poor? I thought about our house. The peeling wallpaper, the sagging porch, the inside frost. I thought about my clothes, the feedsack dresses, the handed-down, everything, the cardboard in my shoes. I thought about our food. Beans and biscuits and cornbread and stretching everything until there was nothing left to stretch. I thought about the dentist and the pulled tooth and the braces I'd never get, and something inside me cracked open. We were poor. I had been poor my entire life and didn't even know it. That night at dinner, chicken and dumplings made from the leftover Sunday chicken I could barely eat. I kept looking around our kitchen with new eyes. The table was old, probably older than Mama, with scratches and burns and one leg that was shorter than the others, so we kept a folded piece of cardboard under it. The chairs didn't match. Daddy had gotten them from different yard sales over the years. The floor was covered in linoleum that was supposed to look like tile but fooled no one, and it was peeling up near the stove. Poor. How had I never seen it? You feeling okay, baby? Mama asked. You're not eating much. I'm fine. Just not hungry. You sure? You're looking a little peaked. I'm fine, Mama. But I wasn't fine. Something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of the world, and I didn't know how to shift it back. That night, lying in bed, I listened to JJ breathe and I cried as quietly as I could. Not because we were poor, though, that was part of it, but because I had been so stupid, so blind, so completely unaware of what everyone else seemed to know. The next few weeks were a fog of realizations, each one more devastating than the last. I realized that the reason Mama always said she'd already eaten when we had dinner was because there wasn't enough food for all 5 of us to eat full portions. She'd take a bite or two and then say she was full, watching us eat with this look on her face that I finally understood was relief that we were fed. I realized that the reason Daddy wore the same work clothes every single day wasn't because he liked them, but because he only had one set. Mama would wash them at night and hang them by the coal stove to dry, and he'd put them back on the next morning, still slightly damp. I realized that the reason we only got new shoes once a year, right before school started, was because that's all we could afford. And the reason Mama always bought them too big was so they'd last longer, which really meant so we wouldn't grow out of them before the year was up. I realized that the government cheese we sometimes had wasn't something special, but something for poor people. Same with the powdered milk that Mama mixed up instead of buying fresh milk from the store. I realized that the reason we never went on vacation, never went to the movies, never went out to eat, never did any of the things I heard other kids talking about wasn't because we didn't want to, but because we couldn't afford to. Everything I thought I knew about my life recontextualized itself in a matter of weeks. And I became angry. Not at my parents, though. There was some of that. The irrational anger of a child who feels lied to. Even though they hadn't lied, they'd just protected. I was angry at the situation. At the fact that some kids had everything and we had nothing. I was angry at myself for being so oblivious, and I was ashamed. Deeply, burningly ashamed. I started noticing how the other kids looked at me. Or maybe they'd always looked at me that way, and I was just now seeing it. The slight wrinkle of their nose when they sat next to me. The way they'd decline to trade snacks at lunch. The way I was never invited to birthday parties or sleepovers. Was it because they knew? Had they always known I was poor and I was the only one who didn't? One day in May, something happened that I can still see clearly when I close my eyes. It was a Friday, and Mrs. Reynolds announced that we'd be having a bake sale the following week to raise money for new playground equipment. Everyone was encouraged to bring in baked goods to sell. I went home so excited. A bake sale? Mama was a wonderful baker. Biscuits were famous in our hollow, and her apple pie had won second place at the county fair 3 years running. Mama! I said, bursting through the door that afternoon, we're having a bake sale. Can you make some biscuits? Or a pie? Or both? She was at the stove, stirring a pot of beans. She turned to look at me, and I saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. When is it? Next Friday. What would you like me to make? Pie, your apple pie. Everyone will buy it. She turned back to the beans. We'll see. Honey, let me check what we have. That weekend, I watched Mama take inventory of our pantry, which was really just a wooden cabinet Daddy had built into the wall. She opened each jar of canned goods, checked the flour bin, counted the eggs from our 3 chickens. Then she sat at the kitchen table with a pencil and paper and did math. I watched her add and subtract, erase, and recalculate. Her forehead wrinkled in concentration. Mama, can we make the pie? She looked up at me, and her eyes were tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Baby, I don't think we have quite enough apples right now. And the brown sugar is low. I need it for your daddy's coffee. Can't we buy some? Not this week, honey. Sorry, but everyone else is bringing stuff. I'll look stupid if I don't bring anything. The words came out harsh and loud, and I saw Mama flinch. Mary Ellen Carter, Daddy said from his chair, where he'd been reading the paper. You watch your tone with your mother. But Daddy, no buts. Your mama said no, and that's final. You apologize. I felt tears burning in my eyes. Tears of frustration and embarrassment and anger all mixed together. I'm sorry, Mama, I mumbled. It's okay, baby, she said quietly. I know you're disappointed. I ran to my room and threw myself on the bed, crying into my pillow so no one would hear. I didn't understand. I couldn't understand. How could we not have money for a few apples and some brown sugar? It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair. If you've made it this far, please hit the subscribe button. These memories are difficult to share, but they're important. That night, after I'd cried myself out and come to the dinner table red-eyed and sniffling, I picked out my beans and cornbread. Daddy cleared his throat. Your mama and I have been talking. I looked up. We're going to go ahead and get the things for that pie. James, Mama said quietly. I know what we discussed. DJ. But our daughter wants to contribute to her school, and we're going to make that happen. But we'll make it work. Mama's mouth pressed into a thin line, but she nodded. I should have been happy. I should have been grateful. And part of me was, but another part of me, the part that was just starting to understand how money worked, how budgets worked, how sacrifice worked, felt sick. What were they giving up so I could have a pie for a bake sale? What would we not eat next week? What bill wouldn't get paid? Thank you, I whispered. You're welcome, baby girl, Daddy said. Now eat your dinner. Monday after school, Mama and I made the pie together. She'd gotten the apples and the brown sugar, though I noticed the bag of sugar was the smallest size. And the apples weren't the good ones from the store, but the bruised ones from the discount bin. We peeled and sliced the apples together, sitting at the kitchen table. Mama showed me how to cut away the bruised parts and use the good flesh, how to make the slices even so they'd cook uniformly. Mama, I said as I worked, I'm sorry about the other day, about asking for the pie when we couldn't afford it. Her hand stilled. What makes you think we can't afford it? I know things are tight. Beth told me we're poor. There I'd said it. The word hung in the air between us like smoke. Mama was quiet for a long moment, her paring knife resting against an apple. Mary Ellen, look at me. I did. We may not have a lot of money. That's true, but we are not poor in the ways that matter. We have a roof over our heads. We have food to eat. We have each other. That's more than a lot of people have. But listen to me. Your daddy works himself to the bone in that mine. I work at the Piggly Wiggly. We do what we have to do to take care of our family. And yes, sometimes that means we have to make choices. Sometimes that means we can't have everything we want, but we have everything we need. Do you understand? I nodded, though I wasn't sure I did understand. Not really. You are not to be ashamed of who you are or where you come from, she continued. You are a Carter. We've been in these mountains for 6 generations. We're hard workers, and we're proud people, and we don't look down on ourselves just because our bank account is smaller than someone else's. Got it? Yes, ma'am. She reached out and cupped my cheek with her rough, work-worn hand. Good. Now let's finish this pie and make it so beautiful that everyone at that school will want a piece. And we did. We made the most beautiful apple pie I'd ever seen, with a lattice crust that Mama wove carefully, and sugar sprinkled on top that sparkled like diamonds. Friday morning, I carried that pie to school like it was made of gold. I set it on the bake sale table with all the other items, store-bought cookies in plastic containers, cupcakes with perfect frosting from the bakery in town, brownies in fancy tins. Our pie, in its aluminum tin covered with wax paper, looked homemade, which it was, but next to all the other items, it looked poor. I felt my face burn with embarrassment. Mrs. Reynolds came over to admire everything. Mary Ellen, did you make this pie? My mama and me together. It's absolutely beautiful. I'm going to buy a slice myself. And she did. When the sale started during lunch, Mrs. Reynolds was first in line, and she bought a slice of our pie. She ate it right there, and I watched her face light up. Mary Ellen, this is the best apple pie I've ever had. Your mother should be selling these. Other people started buying slices. By the end of lunch, our pie was completely gone, while some of the store-bought items still had pieces left. I felt a strange mixture of pride and confusion. Our pie, the cheapest one there probably, made from discount apples and carefully hoarded brown sugar, had been the first to sell out. That afternoon, Mrs. Reynolds pulled me aside. Mary Ellen, I want you to take this home to your mother. She handed me a $5 bill. We sold all 6 slices of your pie at $1 each, and I added a little extra because it was so exceptional. Make sure your mama knows how much everyone enjoyed it. I took the money, staring at it. $5. That was more than the pie cost to make. Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds. No, thank you. And thank your mother. I ran all the way home that afternoon, clutching the $5 in my fist. I burst through the door, breathing hard. Mama! Mama! We sold all the pie, and Mrs. Reynolds gave us $5. Mama came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. $5. Yes, she said it was the best pie she'd ever had. Everyone loved it. Mama took the money, looking at it with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then she bent down and hugged me tight. I'm so proud of you, baby. Mama, you're the one who made the pie. We made it together, and you should be proud of that. That night, I heard Mama and Daddy talking in their room again. I pressed my ear against the wall. She's starting to understand. James, she called us poor today. A long silence. Well, DJ, we are poor. No sense pretending otherwise. I don't want her to grow up ashamed. She won't. You're raising her right. She'll understand that there's a difference between being poor in your pocket and being poor in your spirit. She'll be fine. I hope so. I wish we could give her more. You give her everything that matters. You know that, right? Another silence. I love you, James. I love you too. I went back to my bed, their words echoing in my head. Poor in your pocket versus poor in your spirit. I was starting to understand the difference. 6th grade, I was 11, almost 12. This was the year everything changed, though I didn't know it yet. It started innocently enough. We had a new teacher, Mr. Harrison, who was young and enthusiastic and from somewhere up North Pennsylvania, I think. He didn't understand Appalachia. Not really, but he was trying. He started a program called Lunch Buddies, where students could sign up to have lunch with him once a week and talk about anything we wanted. I signed up, mostly because I liked him and thought it might be nice to have an adult to talk to who wasn't exhausted all the time like my parents were. My first lunch with Mr. Harrison was in October. I brought my usual biscuit and apple. He had a sandwich from the cafeteria and a bottle of Coke. So, Mary Ellen, he said, tell me about yourself. What do you like to do outside of school? I thought about it. I help my mama can vegetables, and I take care of my brothers, and I read when I can, though we don't have many books. What kind of books do you like? I don't know. I like the ones we have at the school library. Adventures, mostly. Have you ever been to the public library in Bickley? I shook my head. We don't really go into town unless we have to. It's far, and gas costs money. Something flickered across his face. Right. Well, you can borrow books from the library for free. You don't have to buy them. I know, but like I said, it's far. He nodded slowly. Mary Ellen, can I ask you something? And you can tell me it's none of my business if you want. Okay, is everything all right at home? I froze. What do you mean? I mean, are you safe? Do you have enough to eat? Is anyone hurting you? No. I mean, yes, I'm safe. No one's hurting me. Why would you think that? He looked uncomfortable. I just noticed that you always bring the same lunch, and sometimes you seem tired. I wanted to make sure everything was okay. I felt my defenses go up. Everything's fine. My mama makes my lunch because she makes better food than the cafeteria, and I'm tired because I help out at home. That's what families do. Of course, I'm sorry if I overstepped. I just care about my students, and I want to make sure everyone has what they need. I have what I need, I said firmly. But that night, lying in bed, his questions echoed in my head. Did I have what I needed? I had food, even if it was the same thing every day. I had clothes, even if they were hand-me-downs. I had a home, even if it was cold and drafty. I had parents who loved me, even if they were too tired to show it sometimes. Was that enough? According to Mr. Harrison's concerned face, maybe it wasn't, and that made me angry again. Who was he to judge? He didn't know us. He didn't know how hard Mama and Daddy worked. He didn't know about the sacrifices they made every single day. He saw a poor kid with a biscuit for lunch and assumed the worst. I decided I didn't want to do lunch buddies anymore. But then something happened that changed everything. It was a Tuesday in November. Cold, gray, the kind of day that makes you want to stay in bed forever. I was at my desk, working on a math worksheet, when the classroom door opened and Principal Morgan came in with a woman I didn't recognize. She was tall and thin, wearing a navy suit and carrying a briefcase. She looked official in a way that made my stomach clench. Mr. Harrison, Principal Morgan said, "This is Sarah Hendricks from Child Protective Services. She's going to be observing today, if that's all right." "Of course," Mr. Harrison said, though his face went pale. The woman. Hendricks sat at the back of the classroom and watched us. Just watched, taking notes occasionally in a little notebook. I tried to focus on my math, but I could feel her eyes on all of us, assessing, judging. At lunch, she came through the cafeteria. I was sitting at my usual spot with my biscuit, and I felt her pause behind me. "Don't look at me," I thought. "Please don't look at me." But she did. She looked right at my lunch, at my worn-out shoes, at my too-big coat with the buttons that didn't match, and she wrote something in her notebook. After school, I saw her in the office, talking to Principal Morgan and Mr. Harrison. Their voices were low, but I could hear snippets as I walked past. Several students who appeared to be concerns about nutrition and home visits might be. I walked faster, my heart pounding. When I got home, I didn't tell Mama about the woman. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid of what it meant. Maybe I thought if I didn't talk about it, it would go away. It didn't go away. 2 weeks later, there was a knock on our door on a Saturday afternoon. Mama was doing laundry, which meant hauling water from our well and heating it on the stove and scrubbing clothes by hand on the washboard, and Daddy was working on the truck. I answered the door. It was Ms. Hendricks. "Hello," she said with a professional smile. "Is your mother or father home?" "Mama," I called, my voice shaking. "Someone's here." Mama came to the door, wiping her wet hands on her apron. When she saw Miss Hendricks, her whole body went tense. "Can I help you, Mrs. Carter? I'm Sarah Hendricks from Child Protective Services. I'd like to talk to you and your husband about your children, if you have a moment." The color drained from Mama's face. "James!" she called. "James, come here." Daddy came around from the side of the house, wiping grease from his hands. When he saw Miss Hendricks, his jaw clenched. "What's this about? May I come in?" They let her in because what else could they do? I sat on the stairs, listening. Ms. Hendricks asked questions. So many questions. About our food, our clothes, our heat, our income, our health care, our everything. Mama and Daddy answered as best they could, their voices tight with barely controlled fear and anger. "We take care of our children," Daddy said at one point. "They're fed, they're clothed, they're loved. What more do you want? Mr. Carter, I'm not here to attack you. I'm here to ensure the welfare of your children. And there have been some concerns raised by who?" Mama demanded. "Who's been talking about us?" "I can't disclose that information, but I can tell you that a teacher at your daughter's school noticed some potential indicators." "Mr. Harrison," I breathed from my spot on the stairs. Everyone turned to look at me. "Mary Ellen," Mama said, "go to your room." But now. I went, but I pressed my ear against my door and listened. The conversation went on for another 30 minutes. Miss Hendricks looked through our cabinets. "We gave her permission because we had nothing to hide," Mama said later, though her voice shook when she said it. "She looked at our beds, our bathroom, our heat source. Finally, she left, but not before saying she'd be filing a report and someone would be in touch." After she was gone, Mama sat at the kitchen table and cried, not delicate tears, but huge, shaking sobs that scared me more than anything I'd ever seen. Daddy held her, his own face hard as stone. "They're going to take our babies," Mama kept saying. "They're going to take them because we're poor." "No one's taking anybody," Daddy said, but his voice wasn't convincing. I came out of my room. "Mama, Daddy, I'm sorry. I think it's my fault." "I think, Mr. Harrison, this isn't your fault, baby," Daddy said. "None of this is your fault. But it felt like my fault. If I'd just kept my mouth shut, if I'd bought the cafeteria lunch like everyone else, if I'd hidden better, the next few weeks were the worst of my childhood. We waited to hear from CPS every day, expecting them to come back and take us away. Mama couldn't eat. Daddy couldn't sleep. Tommy and JJ didn't understand what was happening, but they knew something was wrong. I felt like I was watching my family disintegrate. Finally, a letter came. Ms. Hendricks had determined that while our living conditions were below standard, there was no evidence of neglect or abuse. Case closed, with a recommendation that we connect with social services for assistance. Mama read that letter and then burned it in the coal stove. "We don't need their assistance," she said. "We've made it this far on our own. We'll keep making it." But something had broken. Some illusion of safety, of privacy, of being left alone to live our lives as we saw fit. The world had looked at us and found us wanting. And I hated it. I hated Mr. Harrison for reporting us. I hated Miss Hendricks for coming into our home. I hated being poor, hated everything about it. But more than anything, I hated that there was nothing I could do to change it. If this story is speaking to you, please leave a comment sharing your own experience. Your stories matter just as much as mine. 7th grade, age 12 turning 13. The year I stopped being a child. I wish I could say things got better after the CPS visit, but they didn't. If anything, they got worse, because now I was hyper-aware of everything. Every worn-out piece of clothing, every too simple meal, every broken thing we couldn't afford to fix, and I started lying. When kids asked where I got my clothes, I said from a store in Charleston, not my cousin gave them to me. When they asked what I did over the weekend, I made up activities, restaurants, shopping, things I'd never done, but that sounded normal. When they asked about my house, I described a different house, a nicer house, a house that existed only in my imagination. I became so good at lying that I almost believed my own stories. Almost. The worst part was lying to myself. Pretending that the constant knot of anxiety in my stomach was normal. Pretending that the embarrassment that colored every interaction was just shyness. Pretending that I was fine, everything was fine, we were fine, we weren't fine. Daddy got hurt at the mine that winter. A piece of equipment malfunctioned and a beam fell on his leg, shattering his ankle. He was laid up for 3 months, unable to work. 3 months of no paycheck. Mama picked up extra shifts at the Piggly Wiggly. She'd leave at 5 a.m. and not come home until 7 p.m., working herself to exhaustion. I took over most of the housework and cooking, taking care of Tommy and JJ while trying to keep up with my own school. We applied for unemployment, for disability, for every form of assistance we could find. The paperwork was endless, and the amounts they gave us weren't enough, but it was something. We started getting food from the church pantry. Every Friday, Mama would drive to Hilltop Baptist and pick up a box of canned goods, dole bread, and whatever else they had. Sometimes there'd be fresh vegetables if someone had donated from their garden. Sometimes there'd be a chicken, frozen and wrapped in plastic. The first time Mama came home with that box, she couldn't look at us, just set it on the counter and went to her room. I heard her crying through the door. Daddy, on the couch with his leg propped up, stared at the ceiling. Go help your mama unpack that. Mary Ellen, he said quietly. I did. I put away the cans of green beans, the boxers of pasta, the bags of rice, and with each item, I felt the weight of our situation settling heavier on my shoulders. This was who we were now. Not just poor, but charity cases. People who needed handouts to survive. I went to school the next day, and someone asked what I'd had for dinner. Steak, I lied. My mom made steak and baked potatoes. The truth canned soup from the church pantry stayed locked in my throat. It was around this time that I met Mrs. Patterson. Not the school nurse, that was a different Mrs. Patterson. This Mrs. Patterson was a volunteer at the church pantry, a woman in her 60s with white hair and kind eyes and a way of seeing through people's walls. The third time Mama picked up our box, Mrs. Patterson asked if she could speak with her privately. I waited in the truck with Tommy and JJ watching through the window as Mrs. Patterson talked and Mama listened. Her arms wrapped around herself like she was holding herself together by force. When Mama came out, she was crying again, but it was a different kind of crying. Softer, less desperate. What did she say? I asked as we drove home. She said that accepting help isn't the same as giving up, that everyone needs help sometimes, and that doesn't make us less than anyone else. Do you believe her? Mama was quiet for a long time. I'm trying to. Mrs. Patterson started checking in on us. She'd stop by with things, a bag of clothes her grandkids had outgrown, a casserole she'd made too much of, a few dollars she found and thought we could use. Mama was too proud to accept most of it, but Mrs. Patterson was persistent. Donna Jean, she said one day, when Mama tried to refuse a winter coat for me, there is no shame in letting people help you. The shame is in letting your child go cold when there's a warm coat right here. Mama took the coat. I wore it every day, and it was the warmest thing I'd ever owned. And I hated it because it was charity, and I loved it because it kept me from shivering in class. Things came to a head in March, right before my 13th birthday. Daddy's ankle had healed enough for him to go back to work, but it wasn't the same. He walked with a limp now, and he was in pain constantly, though he tried to hide it. The mine put him on light duty, which meant less money, which meant we were still struggling. I came home from school one day to find Mama sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills and papers, her head in her hands. Mama? She looked up and her face was ravaged. Mary Ellen, how was school? It was fine. Mama, what's wrong? Nothing, baby. Just trying to figure some things out. Can I help? No. This is grown-up stuff. But I could see the numbers on the papers, the red stamps that said past due, the disconnect notices from the electric company and the phone company. We're going to lose the electricity, aren't we? Mama's face crumpled. I don't know, baby. I'm trying so hard. I sat down next to her and looked at the bills. How much do we owe? Mary Ellen, how much? She sighed. $247 to keep the lights on, $89 for the phone, $156 for the water bill, that's 3 months overdue. I did the math in my head. Almost $500. Might as well have been $5 million. What are we going to do? I don't know yet. Your daddy and I will figure something out. We always do. But I could hear the doubt in her voice. That night, I lay in bed and made a decision. I was going to get a job. I was only 12, almost 13, too young to work legally most places, but I knew people hired kids under the table for farm work, for cleaning, for all sorts of things. The next day after school, instead of going straight home, I walked into town. It was a long walk, about 5 miles, but I was determined. I went to every business on Main Street, the hardware store, the diner, the feed store, the pharmacy. I asked if they needed help. Most people looked at me with pity and said no. But at the very last place, I tried a small diner called Rosie's da Ona. A woman named Rosie, of course, studied me for a long moment. "How old are you, honey?" 13, I lied. I would be in 2 weeks. So it barely counted as a lie. "You know, I can't officially hire anyone under 16, yes, ma'am, but I could use some help washing dishes on weekends." Off the books. 4 hours on Saturday, for on Sandy, $5 an hour. Cash. My heart leaped. Really? 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 "But you need your parents' permission." "I'll get it. And you keep your grades up. I see them slipping. This arrangement ends." Deal. Deal. I walked home another 5 miles, practically floating. When I told Mama and Daddy, they said no immediately. "Absolutely not," Daddy said. "You're a child. You should be focused on school, not working." "But I want to help." "We don't need your help, Mary Ellen," Mama said, but her voice was weak. "Yes, you do. I saw the bills. Mama, I know we're going to lose the electricity. Let me do this. Mary Ellen, please." They looked at each other, having one of those wordless conversations married people have. Finally, Daddy sighed. "Just weekends, and if your grades drop even a little bit, you quit." Understood. Understood. I started working at Rosie's that Saturday. 8 hours of washing dishes, my hands wrinkled and red from the hot water and harsh soap, my back ached, my feet hurt. And I had never felt more proud in my life. That first week, Rosie handed me $40 in cash. I stared at it like it was treasure. I brought it home and put it on the kitchen table. "What's this?" Mama asked. "My first paycheck for the electric bill." Mama looked at that money, and then at me, and then she pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. "Thank you, baby," she whispered. "Thank you." Working at Rosie's changed things. Not everything. We were still poor, still struggling, still just barely making it from one month to the next. But that small contribution, that $160 a month, made a difference. And more than that, it gave me something I'd been missing: agency, control. The feeling that I wasn't just a victim of circumstance, but someone who could actually do something about my situation. I kept working there all through 7th and 8th grade, and slowly, painfully, I started to understand something important. Being poor wasn't a moral failing. It wasn't punishment for not working hard enough. God knows my parents worked harder than anyone I knew. It wasn't something to be ashamed of, though I still felt the shame like a constant weight. It was just a circumstance. A difficult, painful, unfair circumstance, but a circumstance nonetheless. And circumstances could change. Before I continue with the rest of this story, I want to ask you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. These memories are difficult to share, but knowing that they might help someone else makes it worthwhile. 8th grade, I was 14 now, actually 14. Not lying about it. And something shifted. Maybe it was the work at Rosie's giving me confidence. Maybe it was just growing up, developing the emotional tools to handle difficult truths. Maybe it was Mrs. Patterson's continued presence in our lives, showing me that kindness existed outside of family. Whatever it was, I stopped being so angry. Oh, I was still frustrated, still embarrassed sometimes, still wished things were different. But the rage that had consumed me for years started to fade, replaced by something more nuanced. Understanding, maybe? Or at least the beginning of it. I started really seeing my parents for the first time, not as the providers who weren't providing enough, but as palpably as James and Donna Jean, who had gotten married at 19 and desoited, who had 3 kids by the time they were 25, who worked themselves to exhaustion every single day trying to give us a better life than they'd had. I saw Daddy's limp and understood that he'd sacrificed his body for us every day in that mine, breathing in coal dust, risking his life, damaging his health. I saw Mama's worn hands and understood that every meal she made, every piece of clothing she mended, every penny she stretched was an act of love. I saw them, and once I really saw them, I couldn't be angry anymore. One day in April, I came home from school to find Mama in the garden, preparing the soil for spring planting. She was on her knees, her hands deep in the dirt, her face streaked with sweat despite the cool air. I dropped my backpack and joined her. "You don't have to help, baby. Don't you have homework? I can do it later." "What are we planting?" "Tomatoes here, green beans there, squash along the fence." We worked in silence for a while, the kind of comfortable silence that comes from being with someone you love. Then I said, "Mama, I'm sorry." "For what?" "For being such a brat the last few years. For complaining. For being embarrassed. For all of it." Her hands stilled. "Mary Ellen, I understand now. I understand why we live the way we do. I understand that you and Daddy are doing the best you can. I understand that you love us more than anything, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." Mama sat back on her heels, looking at me with tears in her eyes. "Oh, baby. You don't have anything to apologize for. You were just trying to make sense of things. That's what kids do. But I was mean to you. I was ungrateful. You were hurting. There's a difference." She reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "You know what I see when I look at you? I see a strong, smart, compassionate young woman. I see someone who works hard, who helps her family, who doesn't give up even when things are difficult. I see someone I'm incredibly proud of. Even though I'm not going to college, probably." The words slipped out before I could stop them. Mama's face fell. "Who says you're not going to college?" "Mama, we can't afford it. We'll figure it out. There are scholarships, loans, ways to make it work. I don't want you to take out loans you can't pay back. That's not for you to worry about, but it is. I'm part of this family. What affects you affects me." She pulled me into a hug, right there in the dirt. "You're going to college, Mary Ellen. Even if I have to work 3 jobs to make it happen. You're getting out of these hollers. You're going to have opportunities your daddy and I never had. That's all we want. What if I don't want to leave?" "Then you don't, but you're going to have the choice. That's what matters." I hugged her back, breathing in her smell of sweat and dirt and the lavender soap she used, and I felt something settle in my chest. Purpose, maybe, or determination. I was going to make it, not just for me, but for them, for Mama and Daddy and all the sacrifices they'd made. I was going to be the first person in our family to go to college, and I was going to make them proud. High school started that fall. The regional high school served 5 different communities, pulling kids from hollers all over the county, which meant I was suddenly in classes with kids who had money. Real money. It was culture shock all over again. But this Chimie, I handled it differently. I didn't lie about where I came from. I didn't pretend to be someone I wasn't. When people asked where I lived, I said up in the hollers outside Beck. When they asked what my parents did, I said my dad works at the mine, and my mom works at the Piggly Wiggly. When they made assumptions based on that information, and they did, I let them, because I realized something important. Their opinions of me didn't define me. My worth wasn't determined by my bank account or my address or the labels in my clothes. My worth came from who I was as a person. And I was someone who worked hard, who loved deeply, who didn't give up. That was enough. I threw myself into school. Straight A's in every class. Member of the Honor Society. Volunteer tutor. I did everything I could to build a resume that might earn me scholarships. And I kept working at Rosie's, saving every penny I could. By the time I was a junior, I had $1,200 in a savings account. It wasn't much, but it was mine, earned with my own hands, and it represented possibility. Mrs. Kowalski, my English teacher, pulled me aside one day after class. "Mary Ellen, have you thought about where you want to apply to college?" "Not really. Probably somewhere in-state, cheaper that way." "Have you considered Marshall? They have an excellent education program." "Marshall University. About an hour away." I'd never seriously considered it because it seemed out of reach. "I don't know if I could afford it. Let me help you look into scholarships. And you qualify for financial aid, I'm sure." "Don't count yourself out before you even try." So we applied. Mrs. Kowalski stayed after school with me twice a week, helping me fill out applications, write essays, compile my transcripts and test scores. And in March of my senior year, I got the letter. I'd been accepted to Marshall University with a full scholarship tuition, room, board, books, everything. I stared at that letter for 10 full minutes, unable to believe it. Then I ran all the way home 5 miles, didn't even care, burst through the door, and screamed, "Mama, Daddy, I got in. I got a full scholarship." Mama dropped the plate she was washing. It shattered on the floor, and she didn't even look at it, just ran to me and grabbed me, and we both started crying and laughing at the same time. Daddy came in from outside, and when we told him, his face did something I'd never seen before. It crumpled and rebuilt itself in the span of a second. Pride and joy and relief all mixed together. "My baby girl's going to college," he said, his voice rough. "My baby girl's going to college." We stood there, the three of us, holding each other and crying, while Tommy and JJ looked on in confusion. That night, we had a celebration dinner. Mama made fried chicken, real chicken, not stretched to last a weekend, mashed potatoes and green beans and biscuits, and even a cake she'd made from scratch. We ate until we were stuffed. And then we sat on the porch in the warm spring air, and Daddy told stories about his childhood, and Mama sang the old songs her grandmother had taught her, and I felt more loved than I had ever felt in my entire life. I left for Marshall in August. Mama and Daddy drove me in the truck that had somehow, miraculously, survived all these years. We loaded up my belongings, which fit in 2 duffel bags, and made the drive to Huntington. The campus was beautiful. Old brick buildings, huge trees, students everywhere. It looked like something from a movie. Mama helped me move into my dorm room. It was small, barely bigger than the bedroom I'd shared with my brothers, but it was mine. My own bed, my own desk, my own space. When it was time for them to leave, Mama hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "So, so proud. I love you, Mama. I love you too, baby. You call us if you need anything, anything at all. I will." Daddy's hug was briefer, but no less intense. "You're going to do great things, Mary Ellen. I know you are. I'll make you proud, Daddy. You already have." I watched them drive away in that battered old truck, and I cried like a child, but they were good tears. Tears of gratitude and love and hope. I had made it out. College was hard in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not the academics, I could handle the academics, but the social aspects, the feeling of being from a completely different world than most of my classmates. That was challenging, but I persevered. I made friends. I studied hard. I worked part-time in the campus library to have a little spending money, and every Sunday I called home. Mama would tell me about the garden, about Tommy and JJ, about what was happening in the hollow. Daddy would ask about my classes, if I was eating enough, if I needed anything. I'd tell them I was fine, I had everything I needed, and it was mostly true. I graduated 4 years later with a degree in elementary education and a job offer from a school in Charleston. Good pay, benefits, a chance to build a real career. I took it. And the first thing I did with my first real paycheck was send money home to Mama and Daddy. Not charity, repayment. For everything they'd sacrificed. Mama called me, crying. "You don't have to do this, baby." "I want to, Mama. Please let me help you the way you helped me." "Mary Ellen, please?" Okay. Thank you. Now, here's what I want you to understand. Here's the part that matters. I'm 58 years old now. Mama passed away 5 years ago, cancer, quick and brutal. Daddy followed her 6 months later, a broken heart, the doctor said. Though officially, it was a stroke. They never got to retire. They never got to travel. They never got to do any of the things people are supposed to do in their golden years. They worked until their bodies gave out, and then they died. And when I look back on my childhood, on growing up poor in those Appalachian hollers, I don't feel anger anymore. I don't feel shame. I feel gratitude. Because my parents, with almost nothing, gave me everything that mattered. They gave me values, work ethic, resilience, love. They showed me that poverty of circumstance doesn't mean poverty of spirit. They taught me that there's no shame in needing help only in refusing to give it when you can. They demonstrated through their actions every single day that love isn't about what you can buy or what you can provide materially. It's about sacrifice. It's about showing up even when you're exhausted. It's about doing whatever it takes to give your children a chance at something better. That biscuit Mama packed in my lunch, that wasn't poverty. That was love wrapped in wax paper. Those hand-me-down clothes, they were dignity, carefully mended and passed down with care. That cold house, with the inside frost, it was home, warmed by the love of people who would have given anything to make it better. I didn't grow up poor. I grew up rich in all the ways that actually matter, and it took me half a lifetime to understand that. So if you're watching this and you grew up like I did, with more love than money, more determination than resources, I want you to know something. You are not less than anyone else. Your parents' bank account doesn't define your worth. Those sacrifices you witnessed, even if you didn't understand them at the time, were acts of profound love. And if you're watching this and you're a parent struggling to make ends meet, worried that you're not giving your children enough, let me tell you something else. If your children are fed, clothed, safe, and loved, you are giving them enough. You are enough. The material things, they're nice, but they're not what your children will remember. They'll remember the time you spent with them, the sacrifices you made, the way you showed up even when you were exhausted. They'll remember being loved. And that's what matters. My mama used to say, we may not have much, but we have each other, and that's everything. She was right. That was everything. And if your parents are still alive, call them. Today, right now. Tell them you see them. Tell them you understand. Tell them you're grateful. Don't wait until it's too late like I did. Don't wait until all you have left are memories and regrets about words left unsaid. Tell them now. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like on this video and subscribe to my channel. I share these memories to honor my parents and to remind people that wealth comes in many forms, and the most valuable kind can't be deposited in a bank. And please, in the comments, share your own stories. Tell me about your childhood, about the sacrifices you witnessed, about the moments of love wrapped in poverty. Your stories matter. Your experiences are valid. Your voice deserves to be heard. Thank you for listening to mine. And remember, you are not defined by what you lacked. You are defined by what you learned, how you loved, and who you became. That's my story. That's my truth. That's my Appalachian childhood, when I thought everyone lived like this, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.